Hello and welcome back to another edition of the YouTube channel Virginia Wine and Song, where we celebrate a Virginia wine and we talk about underrated pieces of music from the classic rock era. This time I have been going off in different directions over the last couple of weeks, so I've decided to continue on that off-ramp, talking about something besides music. The other thing I like to talk about on this channel are movies, and I wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to put together a list of my favorite top 10 movies of the 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s. I did a similar list for the 1970s, and I did one for actually I did two for films from the 1980s, and then I did one for the 1990s, and I was able to scrape together 10 movies. Again, they're not probably the best movies of the 2000s, but they're personal favorites, and some of them are really underrated. So I kind of want to talk about underrated things, whether it's music or movies. So we're going to be talking about that, and I'm going to bring some wine into the mix as well. So we are going to mix a couple of bottles of wine with some of these titles of movies that I have chosen as my favorites from the decade from 2000 to 2009. So here we go. From 2000. This movie here is called The Dish. And this is a genre or a subgenre of films that I call eccentric small town folk movies. Movies that take place in small towns or villages, usually in countries besides the United States, usually the UK or Ireland or Italy even, or France, or New Zealand, or in the case of this movie, Australia. And they usually contain characters that are very eccentric, very quirky, and this movie satisfies all of those elements. It's a great little movie, and it's very underrated, very underseen. I think it is streaming on Amazon. I think I looked that up before I did this video, and it's a charming movie, and it's based on a true story about a satellite dish in Australia that was used during the Apollo 11 moonwalk to basically provide communication from the space shuttle back to Earth. They had one big dish that was in California in the northern hemisphere, and they had the other big dish in the southern hemisphere in Australia, and that's basically what this movie is about this dish. It's called the dish for a reason. That's used to basically uplink, or downlink, I should say, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the men who were walking on the moon back down to the people in front of their television sets. And the whole world, of course, was watching that historic event. And there are a couple of crises in this movie that are, again, based on a true story. I won't spoil what they are. Very minimal, not edge of your seat crises like Apollo 13. I'm not going to compare this movie with Apollo 13. That's a totally different movie, totally different space launch. This is Apollo 11, and the characters in this movie are scientists. One is a guy from Houston. He's a NASA scientist. He's from the States. He's American, but all the other characters are Australian, including the character played by Sam Neill. He's the headliner in this film. He plays the main aerospace engineer working at this compound in Australia, to basically make sure that things go off without a hitch. And unfortunately, again, not major crisis. It is a comedy. It's a fact-based, eccentric, small-town Australian comedy, and it's got some really funny characterizations, and it's some really laugh-out-loud moments. It's not an in-your-face. These movies are not really made anymore. Unfortunately, they made a lot of these movies in the 80s and the 90s. Like I said, these quaint villager and townfolk comedies like Widow's Peak and Enchanted April and Local Hero and Hear My Song, which I talked about from my movies from the 90s. Even The Full Monty would fall into that category. But they don't really make movies like this anymore. And this is one of the last ones they made, and it came out in 2000. Also, it's got a great soundtrack of hits that were on the radio in 1969. Really just a delightful movie. You can watch it with the kids. There's some salty language in it, but it's not horrible. It's pretty much family friendly, so I highly recommend The Dish. That's 2000. Okay, I'm going to step it up, move it a little quicker here. 2001. This is a movie that actually recently was released on Criterion. I don't have this on Criterion. This is the original DVD pressing, and this is Ghost World. This is actually based on a comic book, a rather subversive comic book strip called Ghost World about these two best friends in high school who are kind of like not really sure what to do with their lives. This movie basically takes place right after they graduate from high school, and they're played by Thora Birch. Thora Birch was from American Beauty. She was the daughter in American Beauty, and she kind of plays the same type of character in this, very cynical, jaded, kind of wise beyond her years, and just has a very awkward look of what's going on around her. And then her best friend is played by Scarlett Johansson, and I think this is one of her first movies, if not her first movie. And she does a good job too. And it's got a great supporting cast in this. Steve Buscemi, the guy who we know from Reservoir Dogs and the funny looking guy from Fargo, all these movies he made. He always played usually villains, kind of psychopath characters, and also sometimes he played historical figures like Nucky Thompson in Boardwalk Empire. But he's in this film. He's got a rather significant role as this guy who collects records, and he's an accountant for a fast food chain, and Thora Birch's character Enid, they form a friendship in this film, and it's not a tacky friendship, it's not inappropriate. It's a very interesting, because these are two people who are really kind of outsiders, and the way they kind of bond over their kind of pessimistic outlook of life, and it kind of brings them together in a way, and they become good friends. It's just a great movie, and it's funny. It's got a certain sense of humor. It's my sense of humor, I think. Very black comedy, but also kind of out there, kind of really weird scenarios. Thora Birch's character ends up taking a remedial art class because she can't graduate high school until she passes this art class. So she takes a summer school art class, and a lot of funny things happen in that. It's a wonderful movie. It got really good acclaim when it came out, but not a lot of people talk about it anymore. I think it's just because it's so cynical, and people, these days, I guess they're not as cynical as they were back in the early 2000s. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to move on to 2002. Speaking of cynicism, this is another movie that's kind of based on a true story. It's called Autofocus, and this is written and directed by Paul Schrader. Paul Schrader, of course, he wrote Taxi Driver, and he wrote and directed a lot of movies like American Gigolo and Cat People, the remake of Cat People, and quite a few movies. The Comfort of Strangers, which is this really odd movie with Christopher Walken that came out in the early 90s. Anyway, this is based on Bob Crane. Bob Crane was the guy who played Hogan from Hogan's Heroes, and if you like bizarre stories about Hollywood, which I kind of like, I've done a lot of reading about this guy and his character and what happened to him, and the friendship that he had with this guy who was a tech gadget. He worked for various Japanese companies like Sony, and I think he worked for Panasonic and other Japanese companies, Sanyo. His name was John Carpenter. John Carpenter, not the movie director, but another guy named John Carpenter. And he introduced Bob Crane, who's played by Greg Kinnear in this film, to all these high-tech gadgets. And you have to remember, this was in the mid to late 60s. So Hogan's Heroes was on television. I think it started in 64 or 65. It was in color. I think the first season was in black and white, but I think eventually it was in color. And so all the stuff was going on while Hogan's Heroes was being made. And there's some dark stuff going on in here because they use this video equipment that's, again, very novel for consumers, at least. It was very popular, I guess, for Hollywood, directors to have access to this equipment, but not regular people. So they start having, doing things with this video equipment, including stuff that is kind of, it's not pornographic, but it's not exactly, compared to The Dish, this is not a film for kids. Let's put it that way. It's a very sad story, very sordid. Bob Crane, he has a couple of marriages, and his marriages end up not working out because he becomes addicted to doing these videos with his friend John Carpenter, who in the movie is played by Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe, I've never seen a bad performance from him. He can do anything, I think. He can even be funny, very comedic. And he is kind of funny in this movie. This movie has a lot of moments of comedy, very dark comedy, but comedy all the same. But it is a tragic story in the end. I don't want to spoil it. If you don't know the story about Bob Crane and what happened to him, is explored in this film. There's a documentary on this DVD. The set design, just like the set design in The Dish from 1969, the set design in this film, which is also taking place in the 60s, is really impeccable. They did a great job recreating what Hollywood looked like in the mid to late 60s. And Maria Bello is in this. She plays an actress who's on Hogan's Heroes, who ends up becoming his second wife. Good movie, very dark. If you like your flavors, dark comedy with tragedy and very uncomfortable things to watch. Not overly uncomfortable, but definitely a lot is left to your imagination in this film. But I really rated highly. Autofocus from 2002. Now we're going to move on to 2003. This is a movie, I don't know what it is, also based on a comic book, American Splendor, similar to Ghost World. Very dark, sardonic batch of comic books that were written back in the 70s. I think maybe even late 60s, but definitely the 70s, American Splendor comics were around. And Harvey Pekar is the guy who wrote the comic books. He didn't do the animation or the comic book drawings. That was done actually by Bob Crumb, who had another documentary made about him back in the 90s. But this is American Splendor, and it's kind of a documentary in a way. It's a dramatization about his life. He's just a file clerk. He's got a really kind of, he's got a secure job working for the state government, or it could be the federal government. He works in the Social Security office in Ohio, in Cleveland. And not a very glamorous life, but he keeps himself sane by reading comic books and listening to jazz music, and he decides to start writing these comic books, but he wasn't an artist, so he couldn't draw them. So he forms a friendship with Robert Crumb in this, and the movie's about him, and he ends up developing cancer, and he has to go through cancer treatment. He ends up getting married. A lot happens, and it's done kind of in a pseudo-documentary style. I can't really describe the way it's made. I've never seen a film like it before, and I've never seen a film like it since. It's wholly unique and also very funny. Paul Giamatti is in this, and I think this was the movie that kind of typecast Paul Giamatti into playing these kind of gruff, grumpy, not exactly attractive. He doesn't mind, looking not very attractive in his films, I've noticed. And this was the first movie I think he really let loose with that, and it's very amusing. And there's some characters in there, again, they're all based on real people. There are some, like Ghost World, very eccentric. I have a tendency to like movies about eccentric people, I guess. So American Splendor from 2003, a very good, amusing film to watch. And the fact that it's based on a comic book series is intriguing as well. Okay, speaking of Paul Giamatti, we're going to move up to 2004. You probably can guess the movie that I'm going to choose because it goes with wine. We're going to bring out a bottle of wine before I reveal my choice for the 2004 movie. This is a bottle of wine that's made by Ducard Winery. Ducard Winery is a winery I believe it's in Rappahannock County. It could be in Madison County. If anybody from Ducard is watching this video, please let me know in the comments. I think they're in Rappahannock County though. And it's a great winery, a real escape. I mean, you feel like you are getting away from it all. You're surrounded by mountains, pretty much almost on three sides. When you get to this winery, you can't believe you're almost like in a cove of mountains are all around you, except for one side. It's close to the Shenandoah National Park, and this was a series of wines they put out in 2022. This is the Black Bear Red. This is a red wine that I believe is Merlot, Cab Sauv, and Petit Verdot, I believe, is in this. It's a blend. Because they're so close to the national park, it's got a national park label on it with a black bear. This is a great wine, a great everyday. Well, you can save it for a special occasion, or you can drink it, with pasta or meat dishes, or even pizza. I highly recommend it. Go to Ducard. It's kind of a drive from Northern Virginia. You probably want to get an Airbnb or a B&B or stay at a motel or something. But it's worth going to because it's just it's an escape. It's a real escape from the hustle and the bustle. And like I said, you are surrounded by mountains on three sides. So to go with this wine from Virginia, We're going to talk about, I mentioned Merlot a minute ago, we're going to talk about Sideways, also with Paul Giamatti. He once again kind of expands on this character. He's a little bit more sociable in this character, more of a gregarious type, whereas in this character he was kind of antisocial. And he gets together with his buddy from college, Jack, played by Thomas Hayden Church. And if you probably are familiar with this movie, it was a big hit at the art house. It kind of expanded into multiplexes. It was a big Oscar favorite. It got a couple of nominations, including Best Picture. Virginia Madsen is in it. Virginia Madsen got an Oscar nomination, as did, I believe, Thomas Hayden Church, and I think Paul Giamatti. I think all three lead actors got Oscar nominations for this movie. I don't think they won. None of them won, but they all got nominated. And it's basically about these two guys who are, Jack, who's played by Thomas Hayden Church, is getting ready to get married. And they decided to go on a winery trip, a week-long winery trip out into California. The area around Santa Barbara. It's not Napa Valley, it's not Sonoma, it's that area, the middle part of California around Santa Barbara, Paso Robles. I think that's just called Central Coast California. Beautiful photography, great script, directed by Alexander Payne. Alexander Payne he made About Schmidt. And he's made a lot of really movies about the human condition, very funny movies, but also movies that about real people, real characters, and a lot of pathos in his films. And this is definitely, I think, his best movie. I like all of his movies with the exception of one movie he made called Downsizing. I wasn't a big fan of that. But all the other movies he's made, I've enjoyed tremendously. And just the photography of this, the sweeping shots of the vineyards, the way the camera kind of goes over, and the music is beautiful jazzy type music, and the relationship that these two guys have is very complicated because Miles, Paul Giamatti's character, he's got kind of a low self-esteem, and the other guy is very high on himself. He's getting married. He does some things in this film that are pretty questionable. He's not exactly a nice character in this, but again, real life people. You may even know people like these two characters in this film. I know I do. So Sideways is a classic and goes really, really well with Ducard red wine, Black Bear Red. Okay, 2004. Oh, this was 2004. This is 2004. Sideways was 2004. 2005, Syriana. This is, I had a couple of lighthearted films with the exception of Autofocus. Autofocus is definitely not lighthearted. This is definitely not lighthearted either. This is called Syriana. And if you want to understand the nature of global terrorism, why terrorism happens, especially Middle Eastern terrorism, watch this film. This came out in 2005, several years after 9/11, and it's written and directed by Stephen Gaghan. Stephen Gaghan was the guy who wrote Traffic, which won a couple of Oscars in 2000. And he directed and wrote this. And this features George Clooney. George Clooney actually was a producer of this movie, and he got an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. He plays a CIA agent who goes into, I don't think they even named the country, to be honest with you. It's called Syriana, which is sort of a hybrid of Syria and Iran. So they don't really mention, I think it's Lebanon. I think they do mention it. I think it's Lebanon. He goes to Lebanon, and he's basically doing this rogue work for the CIA or some. It's very complicated. It's worth watching a couple of times because there's so much going on. And what I think is remarkable about this film is how it shows the intersection of terrorism, why terrorism breeds in that part of the world, and the connection that it has with the oil industry, and what happens with the American interests. And of course, American interests are tied up in oil. Whether we like it or not, we need oil in the United States. We can't run on wind power and solar power at this point. We're not there yet. We do need oil. And there's a lot of characters. A lot happens in this film. Again, you probably need to watch it a couple of times. It's got Matt Damon plays a financial analyst, and he's actually stationed. He's based in Europe, but he goes all over Asia to talk to pretty important people in the Arab community about oil and the best return on their investments and how they can make relationships with various oil companies that are based in the United States, how they can have the best business relationship with these oil um, conglomerates, really. It's just, I never tire of watching it. There's just so much to discover in this film. It's not a comedy at all. Don't expect any laughs. I mean, it's a drop dead serious film. And you will learn a lot, and it'll open your eyes, and it'll actually make you smarter. If you watch this film, you realize, wow, this is pretty intense. This, what's going on in the Arab world, and why Americans are, unfortunately not welcomed by many people in the Arab world. This movie explains why. So anyway, we're worth seeing. This is 2005. Okay, now we're going to go back into lighthearted territory after some serious stuff with this movie. We're going to go into lighthearted, and I actually call this movie a quasi-documentary now. This is Idiocracy. This came out in 2006, and it's become a real cult favorite. It was barely released by the studio, 20th Century Fox. I think it's because they didn't really know how to market it. Mike Judge, who also did Office Space, and he did Beavis and Butthead, his movies are very idiosyncratic, and they're not really meant for a wide audience. Believe it or not, Office Space was not a big hit when it came out in the theaters in 1999. Neither was this, but both movies have become cult classics. Especially now, with everything that's going on in the world, this movie was almost kind of a prophetic in a way about what's been going on. And it's basically about a guy played by Luke Wilson, not the highest guy in the brains department. He agrees to be part of this project where he's frozen in time, and he wakes up, I think, in the year 2505. 2505. Frankly, I think they could have set the clock for like 2020. They could have set the clock for like 2050 or 2060. I mean, they could have set the clock for like 20 or 30 years or 40 years from now, and everything that you see in this movie could be happening. And if you've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. It's beyond words. Idiocracy is basically, we're no longer a democracy. The people who should not be having kids in America are breeding like crazy. The people who should be having kids have stopped giving birth because they don't want their kids growing up in this type of world. So they've stopped breeding. So the only people who are breeding are the people who really shouldn't be. And it's pretty wicked satire. Very, very spot on. And I think a lot of, it's actually being screened now as a midnight film in a lot of college towns, and with good reason. If you see the movie, you know what I mean. So this is Idiocracy. This is 2006. 2007, we only have 3 more left. We're going to go back to the Middle East now. We're going to talk about Charlie Wilson's War. This is from 2007. This is another movie that will definitely help explain the relationships that America has with these various countries, whether it's Afghanistan or Pakistan or Egypt or Israel or Lebanon or Syria. You watch the movies like Idiocracy, Syriana, and Charlie Wilson's War, which is also based on a true story. Charlie Wilson was a senator. I believe he was a senator. He was either in the Senate or he's in the House. I think he was in the Senate. He was from Texas. He was from Eastern Texas. And he was basically involved with allowing Afghanistan to arm itself in the early 80s against the invasion by Russia. When you think about that now, Afghanistan, after everything we know about Afghanistan, coming in the wake of 9/11 and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and all that, our government armed the Afghan people against the invading, at the time they were the Soviet Union still. So, and Charlie Wilson was the man behind that. He was the one who was behind that. He worked very closely with a CIA agent played by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Tom Hanks plays Charlie Wilson. Julia Roberts is in this movie. She plays the second richest woman in Texas. She's a Republican, and she truly believes in arming Afghanistan because she believes that the Soviet Union is an absolute threat to world peace. So even if it means arming a group of people who are probably not fans of the United States, like the Afghan people, she believes that it's important because we got to stop the Soviet Union. How things have changed, right? So anyway, and this one is played for laughs. It is based on a true story, but the story is so outrageous, sort of like autofocus, but autofocus is really not really played for laughs. Autofocus is serious, but they could have made autofocus funnier, but it was such a tragic story at the end with Bob Crane. It would be disrespectful to do that probably, and in bad taste to do that. So they took a more serious route with autofocus. This though, they definitely have a lot more fun with the characters in this. And Tom Hanks, he plays Charlie Wilson as a real womanizer. He's a kind of a playboy. He's a good old boy from Texas, but he's a liberal. Probably nothing like Tom Hanks has ever done before or since. Kind of a different side of Tom Hanks if you see this movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman is he's great at anything. He's wonderful in this movie as the cynical guy who is just, you need somebody like him to be the center point of this crazy idea of arming the Afghans against the Soviets, and he fits the bill. He's perfect in this. Really fun movie to watch. Charlie Wilson's War. Again, you'll probably learn a lot about America's role in the Middle East by watching this film. Okay, 2008, we're going to bring out another bottle of wine because this is a wine-focused movie I'm going to talk about. This is a wine that I focused in a previous installment. This is from Lovingston. This is a winery that's south of Charlottesville. It's about 40 miles south of Charlottesville on the way to Lynchburg. And this is one of the best, I believe this is one of the best wineries in Virginia. This is a true Virginia winery, very industrial. I haven't been there in about 10 years, so I don't know if they've opened a new tasting room, but since when I went there last, about 10 years ago, they still had their tastings done in the crush pad area where they make the wine. They didn't have a fancy tasting room. I think they have a fancy tasting room now because I went to their website and I saw it on their website. So, but not a very well-known winery because they're not in a lot of festivals. But I found this bottle of wine at a store, a country store south of Harrisonburg, and I had to get it because this is just superb wine. This type of wine, you could bring this wine to Paris and do a blind tasting in Paris, and people in Paris would be like probably disagreeing with you and arguing with you that that's a Virginia wine. That's how good this wine is. And the reason why I'm talking about Paris is because the movie that I'm going to talk about now is Bottle Shock, which is a true story, well, based on a true story. I think they took some liberties with what happened in reality, but that's what Hollywood is all about, taking some liberties. This is about the 1976 Tasting of Paris, where California had wines that were entered into that competition, and it was a blind tasting, and the California wines ended up winning. That's the premise of this, and the movie is about this guy who's a lawyer. And he basically quits his job as a lawyer. He's a well-paid lawyer in San Francisco. He quits his job because he wants to buy a winery and he wants to make fantastic wine. And he goes through a lot of trials and tribulations, and it's depicted in this film. He's got his son who's very reckless, and all the son wants to do is party with the bottles of wine and listen to music with his buddies, and just it's 1976. So dazed and confused. What are you going to do? But his son ends up getting pretty serious because they have kind of a crisis that happens in the film. I don't want to spoil the film, but it has a happy ending. It's not like Sideways. It doesn't have a main romance in it. There is some romantic elements in this film. I think that was probably put in there, to satisfy Hollywood tastes. But for the most part, Chateau Merlin, which is the name of the winery in the movie, is a real place. And that is the focus of this movie. And it's Alan Rickman plays Steven Spurrier. Steven Spurrier was a wine snob. He was a self-appointed critic. I don't think he was well known. I think he probably was he thought a lot of himself as a wine critic, but he was a British guy. He was a British guy who was living in Paris, and he had a wine shop in Paris that featured wines from other parts of the world besides France. So you got to remember, this is France, and they're pretty serious about their wine, and they don't like talking about other countries coming into France and promoting other wines from other countries. So, he had this little wine shop that wasn't doing very well, but he considered himself to be a critic, and he thought that California was doing some great things with wine. So he goes to California, and he ends up getting involved with a couple of different wineries there. Chateau Marillan is the main winery that we're talking about here. And the owner of that winery is played by Bill Pullman. Bill Pullman is a very great, wonderful actor, character actor. He does a great job. Chris Pine plays his son. I think it's one of Chris Pine's first movies. He does a great job with a long hair. He looks like a guy you would see in, if you saw Dazed and Confused, that movie, his character would fit right in. So this is a great movie to watch while you're enjoying a bottle of wine from Virginia. I'm just recommending Lovingston just because they're not as well known as some of the other wineries. Lovingston is a great winery though. So check them out next time you're in the Charlottesville area. 40-minute drive south of Charlottesville, but worth checking out. Okay, final movie, 2009. I'm going to try to wrap it up here with another George Clooney movie. This movie doesn't really, people don't really talk about this movie this much. When this came out in 2009, it was talked about. A lot of people were talking about this movie. It was an Oscar. It got nominated for a bunch of Oscars, and it was really timely because it was a movie about the recession, about a character played by George Clooney who makes a living at firing people. That's his job. He goes around from state to state all over the U.S., especially in states in the Rust Belt like Michigan and Kentucky and Ohio. He goes to these states because they're the people in the companies are too cowardly to fire the people themselves, so they hire him. And he works at this company that's all they do is they provide information on severance packages and how to find new jobs and all this stuff. And that's his job. And then this graduate from Cornell University comes into the picture, and she decides, well, we can save a lot of money by not traveling and doing all this online. And that's basically what the guy does for a living, but it's not really about that as much as it's about the relationships that he has. George Clooney's character has a relationship with not only this young girl, this one graduate from Cornell University. He ends up taking her under his wing because she doesn't understand what's at stake here. You're talking about real people getting ready to lose their jobs. These are people who have families. They won't be able to support their families anymore. You can't be cutthroat. You got to do it with a certain amount of grace. So he takes her under his wing, and then he gets involved with another woman played by Vera Farmiga. Vera Farmiga, you probably know her. She's great actress. She's originally from Ukraine, but you would not know it. She's totally Americanized now, and she plays this mysterious woman that is also a traveler. She goes all over the country, and they meet in a hotel, and they end up having a fling. And again, it's another movie that it's kind of cynical and it's got eccentric characters. George Clooney is this, he's George Clooney. He's never been married. He has no intention of being married. He doesn't want to have any kids. So it's frustrating all of his relatives around him about why he's so refusing to do that. And I can relate because I'm the same way. I never really wanted to get married, and I never wanted to have kids. So I really related to this character very well. And the young woman who just graduated from Cornell is played by Anna Kendrick. And this was before she made Pitch Perfect. She was just getting started, and she does a great job. I think she was nominated for an Oscar, and so is Vera Farmiga. I don't think George Clooney was nominated for an Oscar for this, but Vera Farmiga definitely was, and so is Anna Kendrick. They were both nominated for Best Supporting Actress. And they both play variations of women from the 2000s, different attitudes, different viewpoints about how they view the opposite sex, how they view men. Very intriguing, and you can see that George Clooney's character is really intrigued with both of them. Even the young girl, who's young enough to be his daughter almost, but he ends up traveling with her all over the country, and they don't talk about it. I don't know why this movie isn't really discussed that much. Maybe because it's too honest. Maybe the depiction of relationships conveyed in the film is just too honest for people. I don't know, but it's a great one. It's my favorite from 2009. So let's go backwards now in time. 2009, Up in the Air. 2008, Bottle Shock, which you can enjoy with a bottle of Lovingston wine. Charlie Wilson's War from 2007. 2006, Idiocracy. I can't tell you. You will not look at Costco or you won't think about Costco or Starbucks the same way after watching Idiocracy. Let's put it that way. Same with Carl's Jr. Carl's Jr. is the West Coast version of Hardee's. You won't think about them the same after watching Idiocracy either. This is Syriana. It's a very, very serious movie. Great movie to watch. Watch that a couple of times. Sideways, of course, needs no introduction. Sideways and Ducard, they're meant to go together. In fact, I think there was even a couple of years ago, there was even a wine basket at a winery that I saw somewhere in Virginia. And they had a couple of bottles of wine from that winery. And they had a basket with other things in there. And they included a DVD or a Blu-ray copy of Sideways. Really cool idea for a gift basket. American Splendor, this is 2003. 2002, Autofocus. 2001, Ghost World, and then 2000, The Dish. So there you go. Some of my favorite kind of underrated films of the 2000s. Some good wine from Virginia. I hope you take a cue and watch one of these movies, and I will see you next time.